Hey, this is Richard Chancey, and I wanted to say thanks for taking some time out of your day to hang out with Jerry Lawson and I. We are jumping in today to a topic that we're pretty excited to talk to you about. It's called Six Things Pastors Do to Kill Church Growth. And Jerry and I are going to spend a few minutes just kind of running down all the mistakes that we've either made or we've seen pastors make that seem to limit what they can do in their church. And so I thought before we just dove in, I think the last time we did a little bit of an introduction, but I thought I'd give Jerry just a couple more minutes to explain who he is and why you should be listening to him, which he probably won't tell you that, but I will. Jerry, why don't you give us the 60-second overview of Jerry Lawson and Daystar Church?
Yeah, sure. When I think of 5 or 6 things that pastors do to kill a church, I think I've probably done them all and many more. But we started our church out of an old established church. I say it like this: a church of 65 with 65-year-olds. That's kind of where we were, 65 years old, and we rebirthed it as a new church and really started from scratch, built a whole new model, and the church has grown from that, under 100 people to over 2,000 in a really small town, and we've just learned so much. And so when we started teaching that to other churches through a process called 24 to Double, we've literally over the last 5 years taught about several hundred, I would have to guess, but several hundred churches. And so we've learned so much from those pastors and picked up so much about how to better our process that I just love taking opportunities like this to share with other pastors who might be dealing with some of the same things I've been through or I've been through with other pastors over the years.
Yeah, and talk a little bit about the history of Daystar and what your experience with that church is and kind of where it was and where it is now.
Yeah, well, we started Daystar, a church replant, when I was about 28 years old. So I had some gifts. God gives us all gifts, and I was very energetic and worked really hard. And so the church began to grow immediately, almost immediately. But we tapped out. We really maxed out at 400, something like that, 500, and then I really met a church growth leader, just a great guy, a good heart, and he opened my eyes to a lot of things that we didn't know about systems and structure and building teams so that your ministry is reproducible. Because basically where we were was, as long as my hand was in it, it went pretty well. As long as I had enough energy to get to everything and be involved in everything going on, it went pretty well because I had a pretty high standard and a lot of energy. But when I wasn't able to be there, and God, I began to think, God forbid, if I'm gone, if I die, if I leave or whatever, what happens to this church? I just knew we weren't structured for long-term growth. And when we started putting the structure in place, that really is the 24 to Double structure now, we started putting that in place in our church. I found out that it wasn't just a replacement for me being there, but there are actually people in our church that are more gifted in certain areas and certainly more passionate about certain things than I was. And so we started really leaning on their gifts and their talents, and that's really when our church exploded in growth and just really took off.
Yeah, and I'm Richard Chancey, and Jerry and I have become good friends over the last few months. My background is, when I got out of college, I worked in financial services for about 8 or 9 years and woke up one morning and realized that I hated it. And as fate would have it, God's intervention, I met some guys from John Maxwell's organization about that same time and had the opportunity to go to work for John Maxwell, working with business people as well as with churches. And over the next few years, I really just kind of fell in love with building the church. And then when John sold the organization, I went and started working with churches doing consulting in preparation for church construction, and really got a heart for the how-to part of church and trying to go out and find guys that had good systems and good processes that we could put in places for church. And as I was doing that, my good friend over at the Rocket Company, Casey Graham, introduced me to Jerry and Lance Self from Daystar, and this marriage of taking this 24 to Double content that was primarily driven from an event standpoint and putting it online so that more pastors would have access to it from a geographic standpoint, as well as cost, to not have the cost of traveling there. Plus, it's a lot less expensive the way we do it now. So that was kind of my background, and now we're just trying to find ways that we can use technology like what we're doing today and add value to you guys and serve you guys and hopefully inspire you to become and to move forward into what God's got planned for you. So with that in mind, we're going to jump right into these things, and we want to try to add as much value as we can today in about a 50 or 60 minute period. So with that, Jerry, let's jump right into the first point, which is the first thing that pastors do to kill church growth is they're using positive reinforcement as a guide. So let me set this up, Jerry, and then I'll throw it at you. So here's what I'm thinking when we kind of try to flesh out what this idea is. Right now, unfortunately, the church in America is losing steam, right? We know that about 86% of churches are in decline. Another 6 to 7% are flat, and only 6 or 7% are growing. So stay with me here. If you're in an environment where the system is failing and you're getting positive reinforcement, that's not good, right? Because all that positive reinforcement is doing is reinforcing the idea that things are great. And right now, we need to look at positive reinforcement and say, that's not what we need right now. We need resistance. Jerry, why don't you jump in right here and give some ideas on how positive reinforcement might be holding us back and what it feels like to kind of push against the plow on this?
Yeah, so everybody likes to be affirmed and likes to be told that was a great sermon, Pastor, you did a good job. And so we eat that up. I mean, I do. I know most pastors do. But I don't think we can really trust that. And here's why, really. I like to say it like this. The great sermon that I preached this weekend, that's God's gift to me. But the people that I brought into the house, that's my gift back to God. And what I mean by that is that you're gifted. If you're able to get up in front of a lot of people and share the gospel, most of that, I know there's some hard work and there's some prayer and there's some study, but most of that is God's gift to you. You know, Americans' number one fear is falling to their death. The second fear is public speaking. So the very fact that you're able to get up and you're not afraid, but you're able to confidently get up and speak means God gifted you with some things. And that's wonderful. And I've been amazed through the years of how many really small churches have great communicators. I mean, really good preachers. But I've come to realize that preaching is not, you're not going to preach your church into changing your community. You're not going to preach your way into growing your church or your ministry effectiveness. The truth is, people, they don't want to disappoint you. They by nature, most people are people pleasers. So when they meet you at that back door, they're going to say, great job, Pastor, and it may have been a great job. But really, you can't rest on that. You can't say that's enough because there's so much more to do. You know, Jesus called us to make disciples. He called us to, I believe, build teams where disciples are doing the work of ministry, and that's so much more than just a good presentation, good singing, and good preaching.
Yeah, and we know that for a church, a church that's been around for a long time, kind of like Daystar was before you started pastoring, a church that might be 60, 70, 80, or 100 years old, and you've got members there that have been there for a half a century. And when you begin to kind of get momentum around this idea of reaching new people for Christ, that it's going to cost you something. There's going to be some pain associated with it. Talk a little bit about the pain that came when you decided that, hey, I'm going to do something big here, and I'm going to let God have His hands on it.
Yeah, well, there was a lot of pain involved in that because when you think about a church that's been doing things a certain way for such a long time, when you decide, we're gonna be a more purpose-driven, more life-giving kind of church, then you don't just keep doing the same old things over and over again. You may not continue to have dinner on the grounds. You may not continue to have, Southern gospel singings, or there may be a lot of things that you change. And the way you present the message on the weekend is also different because the words you use and the little catchphrases that people are used to that are kind of religious jargon, those kind of go away because you start thinking about the lost people that your church folks have been inviting. And so it's painful to me because I catch myself, or at least when we started to make that change, I would catch myself often saying things that I could have said differently. So it's painful to me. It's a little bit painful for the people because we change things, and that's why you don't want to change it all at once. I talked about this in our last webinar, is that you need to see your church like not like a speedboat, but like a cruise ship. You can turn that speedboat on a dime, and everyone's okay. But if you try to turn a cruise ship really fast, it'd tip over, and you'd lose a lot of people. So that kind of change is painful, and it has to be taken slowly.
Did you have an experience where somebody you just absolutely knew was behind you, and then there was a point in time where they either weren't behind you or they were gone?
Yeah, they were not only not behind me, and they were not only gone, but they were in front of me. They were against us. It was amazing that when we changed, and at each point of the change, I learned from a great leader, Dr. Raymond Culpepper. He told me once, the people who got you to where you are today will usually not be the people to get you to where you want to go tomorrow. And that was so painful for me when I heard him say that, and it's even more painful as I've watched it unfold. I'm thinking of even former board members who left us, and they were angry about the way we changed and some of the things that happened. And listen, I'm not one of those guys that just throws caution to the wind and says, this is the way it's going to be, leave if you want to leave. There's some successful leaders who do it that way. I don't do it that way. It's painful when someone leaves, but I cannot compromise the calling that we have and the vision, the picture of what we think ministry is supposed to look like. I can't compromise that for anyone. And so I've got to be willing to be a bold enough leader to lose people if absolutely necessary.
Yeah, and I think on the other side of that, there's probably people that came out of the woodwork that you thought you may not have even known them when you started this, but they came along beside what you were doing, and had you not had the vision for growing this church and reaching new people, those people would never have appeared.
There's no doubt. There's no doubt that to say there's 10 times more who come out of the woodwork than those who leave, that wouldn't even be accurate. I would probably have to say 50 to 100 times more. So the benefits of following God's calling and following the dream and the vision that you have far outweigh the liabilities of such. The only thing is that sometimes you will lose the ones you're going to lose. And even if you don't lose them, they're not as excited or as involved as they used to be. That will happen on the front end. And you got to have faith to believe that the gains are going to come later. And that's why a lot of guys will not sustain the energy that it takes to bring meaningful changes, because you don't see the change you want up front, and it's difficult to hang in there and wait for it.
Yeah. So let's move on to the second point then. There's far too many churches are killing their growth because they're trying to reinvent the wheel. They're trying to come up with a new way to do church. And I think that's especially a challenge for the church planter, even though I do believe that God puts something in every person that's going to plant a church that says, you're going to do this a brand new way. And I think he puts it there to make you crazy enough to actually plant a church. But talk about the peril of trying to reinvent the wheel.
Yeah, we did that. I think probably every pastor's tried to do that, because now there are so many different resources out there. There's this webinar. There's all kind of conferences that you can go to, and you can get your eye around or get your eyes on and your head around so many different models. And it's a real dangerous trap. And one of my mentors, and one of the mentors for Daystar Church, is a consultant named Dr. Owen Weston. And that's one of the things he told us. He said, be very careful that you don't try to piecemeal your model. Get a little something from Craig Rochelle, a little something from Andy Stanley, a little something from Rick Warren, a little something from Church of the Highlands. Be careful not to do that. Make sure you determine what you're trying to do. Find what you're trying to do, and who's doing that most like what you're trying to do. Who's doing it in the kind of environment with the kind of challenges that you face, and then learn from them. Now, don't copy anyone. Don't just do what they're doing, because your church is unique and there is no other church like yours. But there are some churches out there that have a similar goal, similar kind of idea of what they want to do, and some similar circumstances. And honestly, Richard, that's why Daystar, we started training other churches. They started asking. I thought when Dr. Weston first suggested to me that we do this 24 to double and we start training churches, I said, Doco, we call him Doco because his name's Dr. Owen. But I said, Doco, no one will come and hear what we have to say. But what churches were asking was, you're in a small town and you don't have a very big budget, and you're a lot like us. We're not in a mega city, and we're not got a mega budget, and you're able to take a church under 100 to over 500, then over 1,000, then over 1,500, then over 2,000. And so there were a lot of people who wanted that, and that's why we decided to start doing the training that we do, because there were people who liked the model. It's a great model, and it would apply, they felt like, in a lot of different circumstances. And that's what I would encourage pastors to do, is don't go away to Catalyst and come home with 5 new things from Catalyst and then go to ARC conference and come away with that, and then go to Exponential and come away with that, because that is a big mess. They're all incredible leaders, and I go to those conferences and learn so much from those leaders. But in terms of what's the model for my church, I've got to determine what is that one model I can look toward and learn from. And it's someone who's right in front of me. It's probably not someone who's 20,000 stronger than me. It's someone who's right in front of me that I can learn from, that have been through some of the things I've been through, and that are accessible to share some of that knowledge. And I think whatever that is for you, stay true to that. Learn from those people over and over and over again as much as you can.
Yeah, it reminds me, this segment reminds me of the statement or the quote, "The confused mind says no." And if you don't take some time to really take a step back from your ministry and work on the ministry instead of working in the ministry, I think what happens is you get blown by the wind, right? When somebody comes along and you see somebody speak at an event and they talk about how much they have success they have with doing small groups this way or leading their staff this way, if you don't have a comprehensive plan that you've sat down and you've thought through, then I think the next big idea is just around the corner. It's the next book you read or the next video that you watch or the next conference that you go to, and that can be a dangerous cycle to be in.
Well, a quick example of that is I went to Catalyst a few years ago, and a person I have utmost respect for, Francis Chan, was talking about the church building they built in Southern California, and it's kind of like a old-time tabernacle. There's not even walls. It's kind of more like a stadium, and what we had just built a big multi-million-dollar building, and I felt, if I could say it, I just felt like crap. Look at all that money we wasted on brick and mortar, and we should have, sent that to the mission field like Francis Chan and his church did. But I got home and we had some dreary, cold, rainy days, and I thought, I've never seen that in Southern California. We had some blazing hot Alabama days like you really don't have in Southern California. And then a few years later, Francis Chan wasn't at that church anymore. And so I thought, I really have to look at me, my church, my community, and then a couple mentors that I can really learn from. And sure, I can be inspired by a lot of authors and a lot of conferences, but it's really hard, like you said, it's really hard for my team back home, my congregation, my leaders, to catch on board when I'm turning on a dime every 6 months because there's a new conference out there.
That year, I think, the same year, the last time Francis Chan was at Catalyst, I drove him to the airport when the event was over with, and we got to talk about my work doing church construction, and he made the comment, and we got about halfway there, and he said, "Man, you really enjoy what you do, don't you?" I said, "Yeah, I feel like I'm in the right place. I feel like I'm where God wants me right now, doing what he wants me to do." And I said, "How about you?" I mean, and I'm just kidding, thinking he was going to say, "Oh, I couldn't imagine my life being any better." And I could tell from the comments that he made that he was overwhelmed by his schedule. And I finally just told him, I said, Francis, I go to just about every church conference there is because of my work, and you're at all of them. It's okay to say no to some things. And I think that's an important thing to realize right now when we're talking about not reinventing the wheel. What you say no to is going to be more important than what you say yes to. So you've got to get that filter on that says, not in my church for most things. And that clarity only comes when you've got really well-defined vision for where you're going and a mapped-out strategy for how you're going to get there. So the third point that we're going to talk about is you got too many people doing favors. Jerry, talk to us about what it looks like when you've got too many people doing favors.
Yeah, so one of the phrases I tell people all the time, we talk about this at Daystar, is when we recruit people to serve, we say, do me a favor and don't do me any favors. Because most pastors, churches all around America, the people who are serving on your ministry teams, they feel like they're doing you a favor. And it starts all the way from that moment when they come right up from the altar call experience. They come to the front, they gave their life to Christ, and we immediately strap them with nursery duty. Just in that very moment, they're serving, and you know what? Most of the time they stink at it. They still got tears in their eyes when you ask them, "Will you be willing to do this?" And they're going to do it because their heart is open and they receive something. And the truth of the matter is they're neither passionate about that nor are they gifted to do that. And so they end up doing something that they're awful at. and you wish they'd stop doing it, but you're embarrassed to get them to do it, and they want to stop doing it, but they're guilty and don't want to do it. And so what happens is they don't just stop doing that ministry, they just quit your church altogether because they're embarrassed about it. I call that the desperate volunteer model, and we teach about that in the 2040 Double, one of the sessions. But we want to have people on a destiny-driven model. And so we have this simple little equation, and we say that your passion plus your spiritual gift equals your destiny. We have created a profile. It's a gift and passion profile where we help people answer a few questions, and that helps them determine what their spiritual gift mix is. It's not a gift, but a gift mix, and also where their area of passion is. And if you can help a person determine the intersection, basically kind of where those two indices intersect, that's the point where they're supposed to serve and in their calling. And when you get people serving in their calling, then they're doing it for God and not for you. And as a pastor who I've had people doing me favors, serving in different areas, and now I've got people serving in areas because they feel called to do it, I cannot tell you how big a difference that is, how wonderful it feels to know that these are folks getting up every morning, and they're getting up particularly on the weekend, and they say, today is my day to serve, and I'm going to do what God's called me to do, as opposed to, oh my goodness, should I call the pastor and tell him I can't be there again? Man, that's just so painful. So, when you get to the place where people aren't doing you a favor, but they've found their gift and you've helped them find their gift and calling, man, that's the difference in pushing a wheelbarrow with a flat tire uphill and riding a go-kart downhill. And that's where you want to be, helping people find their destiny.
This one hits the nail on the head for me. I think I've been at my church here in Atlanta now for about 15 years, and for much of that time, we led small groups, or, I did a lot of time on the parking team, and I even led a parking team, and I enjoyed that, but I think there was always this kind of sense that I was doing the church a favor. And about 2.5 years ago, I started leading a high school small group, and the thought that I'm doing my church a favor has not crossed my mind since then. I feel like not only am I getting an education on what it's like to be a teenager these years, which is incredibly important for me, bringing up a 11-year-old daughter, but just the idea of purpose and belonging. And I've got these great friends now that are high school kids, and I look back, and as I'm looking at this gift testing that we're doing to get people in the right seat, I'm thinking, well, I could have been doing this for 15 years, but instead I kind of hopped around until I found the right spot, for me. So this is a critical part of ministry. Hey, so the next point, speeding right along here, is another thing that churches or pastors that are doing that kill church growth is they don't have quantifiable goals. They don't have something they're shooting for. Talk a little bit about that and kind of the areas that that's important, Jerry.
Yeah, so that all begins with vision, and that's why we start module number 1 as vision. We say before you can do anything else, you got to find out what you're great at, what you're called to do. And we use something called the hedgehog principle, which helps you find out what is, where your vision should be. It's a great little process to take your team through. But when you start with vision, and then you continue to recast vision, and that vision gets more and more detailed and more specific, then people will know what it looks like when we win. Andy Stanley said, vision leaks. And I think that's so true. It's kind of what Rick Warren said when he said you have to restate your vision every 30 days to your people. I believe that's so important because people will, I think people will live and die for vision. But if it lacks clarity, they won't do anything. They won't, they'll climb a mountain for vision. They won't cross the road for lack of clarity. So we need to know what it is we're after. Habakkuk 2 tells us put it on a billboard, make it very plain. Habakkuk 1 tells us that vision is based on your burden. You've got a burden in your heart, and that burden births a vision. People need to know that, need to feel that, and then make it quantifiable. So, on our teams, we have the worship team has goals they need to meet. The altar team, we have a certain number of people who will raise their hand that they want to receive Christ, and then we encourage them to come forward. We count the hands raised. We count how many people came forward. We count how many people who made a commitment get baptized. We count how many people went from that commitment into our growth track, how many went from 101 to 201. I mean, we count it all. We measure it all. We even measure, we keep metrics on each individual staff member. And the way they get a pay raise is not because cost of living went up 3%, but because they met their benchmarks and they met their goals. And they don't meet their goals if the whole church doesn't meet its goals. So I can be blowing it up in youth ministry, but if the church didn't grow and the budget didn't grow there, then I can't get a pay raise in youth ministry, so that everybody's tied into the whole team. And it basically says if we all don't win, I can't win. And so that's a big part of how you get that camaraderie and that teamwork and everybody on board at the same time.
And a big part of the way that you guys run Daystar and the way that 24 to Double runs is those staff members. Many of those staff members are responsible for one of these 7 teams that we help build, right? So they're driven to get people in the right seat on those teams.
Yeah, and it's very clear. When we started out, we had almost every team leader was a volunteer. And I think today we have one of the 7 teams that is led by a volunteer still. But as the church has grown, and Daco explained it to us, that as the church grows, you'll have people on staff in those positions, and that has grown as the church has grown above 2,000. But early on, almost every position was occupied by a volunteer, and they sort of worked their way into it, into that ministry. But the beautiful thing about the matrix, and we won't get into that yet because it's kind of deep into the process of 24 to Double, but there's a matrix that really weaves all the teams together. So it's impossible to have a pirate team. Now, I was a youth pastor, and I led a renegade team. I thought my youth group was better than the whole rest of the church, and I couldn't stand the children's department, and they couldn't stand me. But this matrix doesn't make that possible. It really causes everyone to come together, and it's a beautiful thing where we all share in the goals and all of our. I have some specific goals for my department if I'm a youth or children's pastor, but there are shared goals that we have to all meet together, and that's really the backbone of unity.
You touched on something a little bit there that I want to dive into for just a second. In my years doing church construction and getting churches ready for that, I was always amazed to see that facilities were not the largest expense for most churches. It was actually staff. And talk about what the 24 to Double model has done to your staff cost.
Yeah. So the best way I can tell it is the accountant who does our church books. He is the second largest accountant for churches in America, and he told me that he has never done church books for a church that has less staff cost than Daystar. He said in his history, he's done huge churches. He does T.D. Jakes' church. He's done small churches, rural churches. So it's never been a church with a smaller percentage of staff. And that's because we empower people and we build teams, and people have a way. They don't just go straight from the altar to being over something, but they find their gift and their talent, and they grow and they mature, and there's places for them to expand. And it's a process that helps people have a safe place to serve and grow into a bigger area of responsibility. And so basically, someone on our staff was talking to a volunteer who wanted to be in ministry, and he told me what he told him. And he said, basically, if you want to be on staff at Daystar, you just do so much until they can't make it without you, and then you get a job. And incidentally, that's exactly what he had done. His name's Dave. That's exactly how he got in the ministry, is he did so much we couldn't make it without him. And so there's constantly people growing, and because we make it so clear and so plain what we want them to do, they will grow in their area of ministry, and they love it until eventually, as the church has grown and we need a new position, they're clearly the person we need. And that's so huge. That's so much better than going out and hiring some big gun from some other church, because I don't know what he believes in. I don't know what his ethics are. I don't know what he thinks about me and my leadership or my church. I don't know if he likes our town. So there's so many variables that we get to bypass when we have great teams that are growing our staff from within. We bypass all those variables, and there's still a few, but most of those variables are solved as they've grown up through our church.
Funny story is I built for a church over in Athens that was actually a North Point strategic partner, and I remember the lead pastor telling me one time that he'd interviewed 5 or 6 people for their small groups pastor, and none of them had ever led a small group, which is kind of funny. But to make a pretty serious point, if you've ever had to fire somebody that looked really good on paper but couldn't get the job done, this will eliminate that. The having people that kind of work their way into a position so that when you start paying them, you know they can do what they say they can do. So I think that's pretty big. This next point is a big one. Jerry, is one of the things that'll kill church growth is just not having the belief in yourself, that you doubt what God can do through you.
Yeah, when we think too small, I really think about it like this. This is almost going to sound like a contradiction in terms, but let me explain it. I think there's a big problem, and then there's a bigger problem. All right, the big problem is when you take yourself too seriously. The bigger problem is when you don't take yourself serious enough. And let me explain that. I think there's a lot of religious people who take themselves way too seriously. I can't be called Jerry. I got to be called bishop or pastor. I can't wear whatever I feel comfortable wearing. I can't just talk in these terms. I've got to have on my preacher voice on Sunday, or I got to say, big words that I learned in seminary. I think that's taking yourself too seriously. But on the other hand, there are times that you need to take yourself more seriously. And I'm talking to pastors, and I want you to hear me when I say this. You are called by heaven. We believe that the church is the hope for all humanity, and there is no plan B. You are it. The church is it, and you're the leader. You need to take that seriously. And you need to know that the vision that God birthed inside of you, He is well able to do that thing. And so you need to take it seriously that you're the temple of the Holy Spirit. I mean, He flows inside of you. And what He can do for you is beyond your ability. My little church, when we started Daystar, we were in a town of 491 people. It was not in Coleman, which in and of itself is not a big town, but the little town outside of Coleman that we were in, 491 people. Before we left that town, we had 800 in attendance. All right, so the town doubled on Sunday because we opened up shop. That's amazing. And I'm going to tell you, God's the same God for you. He can do huge things for you. It doesn't matter. You don't have to keep looking at the Andy Stanleys and Craig Rochelle's of the world that are in bigger cities with different kind of scenarios. There's something big where you live. There's something huge in the heart of God where you live, and He's chosen to speak to you about it. And so I don't want you for a minute to hear the kind of things I'm talking about and say, well, it just wouldn't work for me. I don't have those gifts. You have the gifter that I have, and that's God. And the God who created you put gifts inside of you. And I know you can hear me, Richard. I'm passionate about this, making pastors know that they ought to be serious about their gift and calling, because God is very serious. When He said, I formed you in your mother's womb and put gifts inside of you before you were even born, I take that very seriously, and I think every pastor listening to me should as well.
Man, I'm telling you, Jerry, if they had a victory lap button on Google Plus right now, I'd be hitting it. A few weeks ago, I finished a job in Texarkana, Texas, a construction job, about a $5 million building that was a new sanctuary out there, and I got to be really good friends with the pastor over that time. His name's Tim Montgomery, and we were standing in the mezzanine area of this church, which we built this incredible new worship facility for this church, and a new children's ministry building, and this hallway that ran between the old building and the new one. A mezzanine area is all I can say it. And we stood there, and I thought, this hallway is going to change this church, the way these people do church and the way they do community before and after services. And Tim and I were standing there talking, and I said, did you ever think it would be like this? He said, in my wildest imagination, 10 years ago when we were meeting in a boot store in Texarkana, Texas, I would never have imagined this. So here's the point I'm trying to make. You really can't think as big as where God's taking you. So thinking small from your reference point is dangerous, because even when you think really big, God is going far above that and beyond that. So we've got to develop that muscle inside of us, that faith muscle that says, I can, and even if I can't, He can. And that we're making ourselves available. And in my mind, the commitment to doing what God's calling you to do is more important than being able to see clearly where He's taking you, because He's going to take you farther beyond than that. So I think I just turned this into a sermon. So
that's a good one. Let's talk about the last one. All right, number 6, guys, is when pastors kill their church by doing it all. Now, listen, I'm a good person to talk about this problem because I've had this problem many times. I'm a type A personality, very detail-oriented person, and I'm a controller. I've had to confess that and give that to the Lord, and He's redeemed it and helped me be a good leader. But by nature, I'm a controller, and so it makes it really, really hard for me to let things go. And so I want to run everything. And I remember reading a book by John Maxwell, and he just made a line in there that said, great leaders walk slowly through the crowd. And boy, that was like hitting me with a boat paddle in the face, because I didn't do that. I wanted to be a great leader, and I kind of thought I was a pretty good leader, but I clearly didn't do that because I was doing too many things, especially on Sunday. I'd be zipping through that sanctuary, making sure this is right and that's right. If you're doing that, Pastor, that's a clear sign that you're doing too many things. And here's what we tell our staff now that I've learned this lesson over many years. I tell my team, we don't hire doers. You cannot maintain your job by doing enough things. We hire leaders. And I tell them, if somehow you slip through the cracks and you got hired and you're a doer, then you don't get to stay in this job until you learn how to be a leader. And that's why I do a small group on leadership. I teach leadership principles and I just tell my staff, if you think maybe you slipped through the cracks and I haven't found out yet that you're just a doer, then the best thing to do is join my small group and let me teach you how to be a better leader. Because if you're not empowering others, you're not doing the Great Commission. He didn't say go and make a big crowd. He said go and make disciples. And when you think about what Jesus did, how did he do discipleship? He didn't say go to Sunday school. We've always said Sunday school is discipleship. He said come and follow me. And so first Jesus did it, and they watched him do it. And then they did it with Jesus. And then thirdly, they did it, and Jesus watched. And so that's what great leadership is. If you just boil it down to three things, you model it, you partner in it, and then you watch as they do it. And so that's why really a big part of what we teach in 24 to Double is empowering leaders, showing people how to do, building teams so that constantly new leaders are emerging. And I love it because every month there's some new leader, it seems like, emerging. Somebody will come up to me. In fact, the way Lance ended up getting on our team as executive pastor is he was on a youth ministry leadership team. And the youth pastor came up to me and said, Pastor, you've got to meet this guy named Lance. He's an incredible leader. And we would have never known it if we were just doing all the stuff. But we're constantly empowering people to do things. And then occasionally someone just blows the roof off the place. And you go, wow, I had no idea there was someone with that much potential in the room. And again, that'll never happen until you start building teams and you empower leaders to do things on their own.
One thing that comes to my mind is a book I read a while back called The 4-Hour Work Week. And one of the questions that he asked partway through that book is, if you went to the doctor and they said, you're going to die unless you stop working but 2 hours a day, what would you do with those 2 hours a day? And you kind of work through that exercise of going, okay, if I was only going to work 2 hours a day, I would do this, 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 and this, and I'd hand everything else off. And then the next thing he asks, okay, you go back and he said, it's not getting any better. Now you can only work 2 hours a week. What would you do? And what that did for me is it put me in the frame of mind of going, what are the things that only I can do? And how do I get to the point of where I can hand off some of this other stuff? And sometimes for you, Pastor, that means you've got to hand things off to people that are volunteers. You've got to seek them out, find out what they're good at, and hand stuff off to them so that you're not doing everything. Because this is what I do know. One man cannot grow a church. It's impossible. And the formula for keeping your church small is to do everything. That's the formula.
Yeah, so, and I think it's very irresponsible too, because some people do have great capacity in doing things, and that was one of my challenges. Is I'm a really good doer, and so our church really grew when it was all leaning on me, and then just through prayer, God just convicted me and said, Jerry, this thing is not about you, and if you went away. If something happened to you and you went away, this whole thing would come crashing. And I think we've all seen churches that have done that. They would, and even big, huge churches built on one man, and the whole thing comes crashing down. I just don't think that's God's model for us. I don't think it's His calling at all. And so that's why we are so passionate about helping build teams. We build a whole church around 7 teams that are a logical step from the first time you will hear about our church all the way until you're fully integrated. You go teams 1 through 7, and it's like you've got 7 labs of team building and 7 labs of leadership building. So I just love it, knowing that I've got all these teams and all these potential leaders growing up on a daily basis. It's so exciting to be a pastor and know that's coming your way.
Well, hey, I wanted to say thanks to Jerry and also thanks to you. And Jerry and I both hope that you enjoyed this webinar as much as we enjoy putting them together for you. And we wanted to let you know, if you're serious about growing your church, 24 to Double might be a good fit for you. So I just wanted to answer one question for you before we let you go, and that is, what is 24 to Double? And here's what it is. First of all, it's exclusive. It's the first and only membership community focused purely on helping churches grow by anywhere from 59 to 228%. And those are real numbers that we have seen happen in the 24 to double process. Honestly, a lot of that growth happens on the front end, but the whole process is about not just helping you grow, but helping you sustain the growth, not just getting people to church, but getting them to come back. And secondly, it's affordable. When Jerry and Lance engaged with Dr. Owen Weston, they were paying anywhere from about $3,500 a month to $6,000 a month. So we demolished the financial barrier between churches and high-price consulting. This content is delivered to you monthly at the same time every month. You can use it without leaving the comfort of your church. You don't have to spend money on hotels or gas or any of that stuff, or try to get your lay leaders to leave their job for a few days to come enjoy this training. The next thing is it's easy, right? And what I probably should have put there was that it's simple, right? It's a done for you strategy, tools, resources, and training. You're going to get a mountain of information that's going to help you take this and pull it into your church and use it in a very practical way. And then finally, it's personal. You know, we believe that this training is a front for partnering with you to rebuild the church. Hopefully what you've heard today, the undertone from both Jerry and I, is that we are passionate about rebuilding the church and its influence in America. And it's really important to us, and we can't do it by ourselves. We need you to help us with this. Now, here's the thing. Before you get this, let me tell you exactly what it is so that you know that it's right for you and your church. Here's what it is. We're going to give you $737.54 of sign-up bonuses just for trying out 24 to double. And what 24 to double is it's 24 monthly modules delivered each month over the next 24 months with more than 53 hours of church growth training. And that's Jerry and Lance teaching you and your staff, or teaching you and then letting you teach your staff these principles that are going to help you engage new people in your community and grow your church. Also included are train your team resources, which means, like I just said, you can either allow us to train your team, or you can take the information and train your team on your own. It just depends on where you are in the life of your church, and honestly, with where you are in the life of your influence in your church, right? So it also includes VIP replays of webinar training. Much like the training that we did today, every webinar we do, we stick into the membership site so that our members can enjoy it in the future, and as well as bringing new people in and sharing webinars that we've done in the past. The next thing it is that we have live monthly Q&As. Again, we want more than a membership with you. We want a relationship with you. We want to be able to communicate with you. We are top-notch when it comes to handling customer service questions, but we want to have these relationships with you because we want to encourage, inspire, and partner with you to grow your church and to grow the church. We're also throwing in sermon prep notes for 8 series, and we're constantly adding to this. But one thing that Jerry is second to none on is sermon preparation, and his notes are phenomenal. And so what we've done is we've taken 8 series, past series that Jerry has done in his notes, and we've put them into the program. So there's actually 34 individual messages, and part of my hope in doing that was that we would create just a little bit more margin for you in your schedule to be able to take in this 24 to double training so that you can effectively teach it and see it lived out in your church. The last thing's the 24 to double online spiritual gifts and passions test. You heard Jerry and I talk about this during this webinar and other webinars, and basically that spiritual gifts and passions test is the foundation for passionate ministry in your church. What it is it's putting the right people in the right place in day one and not letting them have to figure it out on their own. That is a huge advantage when you go to start rebuilding your church and building the teams that are going to matter. You want people that are passionate in those key ministry areas. We also do monthly webinar calls with pastors that are getting it done, and not just guys that are getting it done using 24 to double, but other pastors that we run into that are growing their churches, because nobody has exclusive rights to ideas on how to grow the church. We want to find the best principles and practices wherever we can and leverage those for you in this effort to grow the church. You're also going to get the first module. You're actually going to get the first 2 modules. You're going to get what we call Module 0, which is the overview and a heavy piece about vision planning and how to do big events. And then you're going to get the first module, which is primarily about making sure that you've ingrained your vision so that when you begin this process of trying to grow your church, you can always come back to center on the vision. And it's a huge tool will be developed in that first module, helping you develop the vision and the statement and making sure that you've got solid foundation as you start this process. And we're doing all of that for you. We're giving you all of these resources for just $99 a month. And that is less than one person tithing in your church. What we were trying to do when we embarked on this journey of taking 24 to double online is to make it where it's within reach of every church. And certainly any church can reposition some finances, or they can go out and find a few guys that can fund $99 a month. On top of that, we're going to give you a bold guarantee. And here's what that is. If after 60 days you don't feel like 24 to double is worth it, we'll give you a 100% refund. No questions asked. You just call us up and say, hey, I want my money back. And all we'll ask you to do is to give us some feedback. But other than that, we're not looking for a way out because we really want you to try this. And on top of that, we're going to give you 14 days to try it out. So after 60 days, you're only going to be into this thing for $99 anyway, and we'll give you the money back. But we want to let you try it out for 14 days for free so that you feel comfortable getting your feet wet, getting into this thing with your team, and seeing if this is a good path for you. Now, here's the thing. You are obviously really serious about growing your church. And I just wanted to take a second and acknowledge that. You know, we've been on the line here for close to 50 minutes, and you've taken time out of your schedule to do this. So there's something inside of you that's serious about making a change. And most pastors never take the time to educate themselves in the way that you have just in these last few minutes, right? So you're online watching, and you really have a commitment, and you're determined to do this now. And that's why I think you are perfect for 24 to double. It's specifically for people like you who are ready to rebuild the church and live out God's vision for their life. So go ahead and click the button below and start the 14-day trial. Again, all the risk is on us. Try it out. If you have questions, give us a shout. And again, I wanted to just say thanks for carving out some time in your schedule to be with us today. And we hope to see you on the other side of the membership site. Thanks.